does also exclude areas such as auto, which is calculated on the basis of the across-the-board 25% increase in auto tariffs to the U.S.
Leighton Zimanze knew from the beginning of January. He has done nothing. He's been quiet. His silence is nowhere. He's missing in action.
We are not going to show mercy to criminals and say because and because. You commit crime, we arrest. Whether you are poor or you are rich.
Midday on this Saturday, the 12th of April 2025. You're watching SABC News. We are live to you from Auckland Park in Johannesburg. It's good to be in your company. This is the Weekend Review here on SABC News. It is our regular gathering spot at the summit of the week, where we pause and reflect and find meaning in the key developments of the week. We do that because we have a country to run, a continent to build, and a world to navigate. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. These are your headlines. The ANC has scheduled a meeting with the DA today to resolve differences in the government of national unity. The two largest GNU partners have been clashing over several issues, including the planned VAT hike. This has threatened the future of their collaboration in government. The US dollar has fallen in global money markets as uncertainty over Donald Trump's trade policies continues to unsettle investors. China has further raised tariffs on US goods to 125%, deepening the trade war between the world's biggest economies. Hey, good afternoon. It's good to be in your company. We've got lots of ground to cover over the next 3 hours, so let's get started. The US President Donald Trump has backtracked somewhat and announced a 90-day pause on his reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries that had gone into effect on Wednesday, the 9th of April, 2025. This excludes China, though, which Trump said would now have a levy of 125% in reaction to Beijing's imposition of an effective 84% levy on all American imports. In fact, Trump has gone on to clarify that tariffs against Chinese goods entering the U.S. actually stand at 145% if you factor in the 20% he imposed for what he believes is China's role in the spread of the drug fentanyl in the United States. To discuss the so-called reciprocal tariffs, their 90-day abatement, as well as the impact that they have on the country, I'm joined by economist Wandile Sihlobo, who is chief economist at the Agriculture Business Chamber of South Africa, and the director and chief economist at Econometrics, Dr. Azar Jammine. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon with me. Before we go any further and talk about the impact of the tariffs on various sectors of our economy, on the globe and everything else, let's make sure that everyone is on board with the conversation. Dr. Azar Jammine, start us off. What are tariffs, as basic as you can give an explanation?
Yeah, in very simple terms, it's a tax on exports of a country to an incoming country. So in other words, the incoming country which imports those goods, as soon as they arrive in the country, has to pay an extra amount on those over and above the basic cost of the good. It's like a tax.
Yeah.
And the higher that tax is, obviously, the higher that the cost, that eventually the cost of the product when it's sold or as an input into production processes, when it is translated into higher prices of those products, and it ends up, consumers end up paying more.
So, Wandile, I take it that the fact of their existence as an economic concept and an instrument that governments can turn to suggests to me that they have some usefulness. What is the usefulness of tariffs? Why would anyone want to use this instrument?
You use the tariffs in times, let's say, for an example, you have an industry that you are trying to develop. and you would call it's still at its infancy. And when you apply them in times like that, then you would apply them as a temporary measure while you are still investing to get that particular industry to be ready. Once it is ready, then you can ease those off. And also in times when I would say there's one country that is dumping product into your market, there's a clear way at how you can calculate what you would call anti-dumping duties. In one way or another, you can utilize them as the tariff. So you use them as a corrective measures, not something that will be widespread as what we are currently seeing at this moment.
So am I correct then, Dr. Jamin, that they are in a way protective of an industry? So it's when you decide that this industry needs protection, therefore, in fact, what I want to ask you is, would I be correct in reading it that they have the effect of raising the price for consumers in the country where the industry is that you are seeking to protect?
Yes, they do indeed raise the price for consumers in the industry that you're trying to protect. Traditionally, and the most logical and rational form of protection is to impose a tariff on imports of competing products, so that are imported, so that your own industry can actually grow and survive. So that the price that you sell in your country where you're producing the good is not higher than the price that you would pay on the same product that is imported. But as Wandile suggested, a general import surcharge of the kind that we're seeing around the world being imposed by the United States is a different story. And a still different story is the kind of reciprocal tariffs that they've now done away with, except for China.
I'm sorry, I'm going to belabor the basic explanations if you'd indulge me for just one more minute. Dr. Jamin, so are we saying that the idea is that once you've added this tax on this product that is being imported into a country, is the idea to discourage consumers, your citizens, from purchasing the imported goods such that they go for the domestically manufactured goods? With what end in sight?
With the end in sight that you basically, the simple explanation is you create more jobs for people inside of the country rather than creating jobs for people outside of the country.
All right, so when those industries are pumping and people are buying that product. Now, let's get to what happened in the last few days then. We saw Donald Trump initially headstrong about proceeding and pushing through with these so-called, quote-unquote, Liberation Day tariffs that had been as high as 84% in some countries, and then at some point 125% against China. But then suddenly there was something of a 180-degree turn. What's the working theory among economists? Wandile, let me start with you. Why the turnaround? Donald Trump is not someone to easily back down from an argument. What made him decide that he's going to pause on the about 75 countries, with the exception of China?
I don't know, Tula, if Dr. Azar has a better answer than me. I don't believe that there's any working theory behind this, except, of course, the fact that the impact of the higher tariff was clear across businesses, across markets on that. As to whether then what's the rationale within the U.S., they say, as they've communicated, that they are creating space for negotiations. Nobody really never knows, at least from where we are sitting at ACBIS, on what goes on in the White House. Suffice to say that the 10% duty that we are facing right now is far better than the environment that we seemed to be in last week, which I think for our exporting industry was a very dangerous terrain to be in. Yeah,
we'll turn to the impact, and I look forward to engaging you a bit more, Wandile, on the agricultural exports from South Africa into the United States. But Dr. Jamin, do you have a better working theory as to why he seemed to, put a pause on the hefty tariffs and basically brought all of us down to 10% across the board, with the exception of China, of course?
He made it clear, and I think this may have been an excuse, we can't be sure, that he did it because no fewer than 75 countries had approached him and kissed him in a certain place of his body, begging for
kissing
relief.
His behind, let's put it that
That's
way.
right. That's right. But deep down, I think what happened was stock markets crashed like they haven't done since the COVID crisis. And many leading businessmen in the United States, CEOs and billionaires, suddenly found themselves losing hundreds of billions of dollars in wealth because of the actions that he had taken, and they started putting pressure on Trump to reverse this measure. And I think he was the one who blinked. There were three people who could have blinked in this situation. The first was Trump. The second was the head of the Federal Reserve Board. He could have blinked by slashing interest rates and helping to ease the pain for consumers. The third was Xi Jinping, who could have blinked and said, all right, we are not going to retaliate the way we said we would. But at the end of the day, the second two didn't blink, and Trump was forced to be the one to blink.
Among the billionaires that you're talking about, I think I saw some commentary that said Elon Musk, who's become quite a key figure in the US, the Trump administration, was among those voices that were flagging just how problematic the tariffs were and the impact they were having on the stock market.
Very much. I don't know if it was only on the stock market or on his own company of Tesla, where a lot of the production facilities are in China themselves. But he called Peter Navarro, who was the architect, the advisor to Trump to introduce these tariffs. Musk called Navarro a moron. So that tells you how polemical it had become within the Trump administration itself.
Yeah, it's all very interesting watching it from across the ocean as it plays itself out in terms of the US domestic political dynamics, Dr. Jamin. But Wandile, you've been flagging a particular aspect of this, and it has to do with the lived impact of the tariffs. So now we're talking 10% across the board, including South Africa, of course, which was one of the 75 plus countries that had been slapped with these tariffs as part of what Trump calls Liberation Day. Just outline for me as it relates to the agricultural sector. Why should someone sitting, I don't know, in Tlazacha somewhere in Mpumalanga care about this and how it impacts the sectors of our economy, particularly agriculture?
I think it starts from the point that Dr. Azar clarified at our beginning of our conversation, which is that the tariffs are a tax on the importing country, which means then if any goods are entering with that tariff on, the competitiveness, price competitiveness of those products in that market gets to be relatively lower than it was before at that time, which means that now when we are selling the products in the US, we may find that our products are not as cheaper as they were about last month. And I think that makes us worry because South Africa, we are exporting quite a lot of products within the US. But I think in the agricultural sector, there's been all of this conversation going on, people saying, look, it's only 4% of our agricultural exports that go to the US. They are right in that at an overall figure. But that 4% is concentrated in a few industries. Citrus is one of those industries, nuts, wine, grapes are some of those. And I think in communities where we grow a lot of this product, you ought to be worried because then if you are exporting to the US and there are all of these challenges, that impact the profitability of the companies that are exporting to that. But I think the most important thing at this moment, Tulasizo, is that the 10% is better than before. Because when we were facing 31%, but our competitors in the US markets were facing duties of about 10%, like Chile and Peru, then we were in a far difficult position. But right now, I think we can compete to a certain extent.
Yeah, and you've been making the point, if I stick with you for a moment, Wandile, you've been making the point that in a way, we were almost, and we continue to be, at the mercy of the American consumer, the extent to which they are willing and able to stomach these increases, and I suppose their demand and taste for our oranges, our mandarins, and all the other things that we export?
Absolutely. And I mean, we have a counter seasonality aspect there. We will be bringing on this fruit. And in fact, Tula, this week, the first shipment out of South Africa started packing that will go to the US. So this 90-day gives us that window. And it will be landing into the US at a time where they don't have this fruit. So that counter seasonality assists us. But also the fact that we are sitting in these consumables, I hope that the American consumer will be able to stomach this. Because I mean, again, to Dr. Azar's point, they're facing a lot of pressure because they are having to pay a lot of money now for goods that they are importing from other countries, either it's manufactured stuff or anything. I hope they can still pay for these oranges and wines.
In a way, they become luxury goods. If you've got expensive taste, you will insist on having South African oranges if you are sitting somewhere in Arkansas. Dr. Jamin, the impact on the agricultural sector is one thing, but we do more than agriculture, right, in terms of exports into the United States. And one industry that has been flagged quite extensively is our automotive industry. Am I correct in reading that it remains in a spot of bother as relates to these exports, in the sense that while across the board, the second wave of tariffs, if we can call it that, the Liberation Day tariffs, we are all now lower at 10%, but not forgetting that there had been a 25% increase specifically applicable to the automotive sector. Am I correct in understanding it that way?
Yes, you're absolutely. And as far as I understand, that 25% tariff on the automotive industry, and there's also a separate 25% tariff on iron and steel and aluminium. Those remain in place. So it's a very, very small respite that the automotive industry gets, 5% as I understand it. And that is really going to penalize our automotive industry, but we've got to be very specific. There are certain companies that will feel it much more than others. Those that have been exporting directly to the United States, and as I understand it, within that is BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Ford Ranger, and a couple of other cars. They specifically have had a lot of their exports going to the United States. They will feel the pinch. But I want to make a broader point. That's the automotive. A lot of our mineral exports have been exempt because they're too valuable for the United States. Platinum group metals, coal, vanadium, manganese, that sort of thing. So, and that's the majority of our exports. So the direct tariffs on our exports is actually a minority of our exports to the United States. The bigger negative effect is that these tariffs imposed, even the baseline 10%, is a heavy tax on imports from the rest of the world. Combine that with the massive 100+ tariffs that are still going to be in place against China and by China on the United States, and we're looking at a world recession. And it's that indirect effect of a potential world recession that is, I believe, more serious for us to contemplate than just the direct tariffs that have been imposed.
So in the remaining time that I still have with you both, gentlemen, let's talk pathways forward. Wandile, let me start with you. A lot of people say this is an opportunity in a way. Is it the kind of opportunity that people are talking about, diversifying the export destinations of our agricultural produce, for example? Is that something that can be implemented in this moment?
I think I take the point. But I think they have to appreciate that at a practical level, there are supply chains and relationships that are established here. You cannot just quickly move it to another area overnight. So with the US, the long-term aspect has to be negotiating a free trade agreement. Dr. Azar will tell you that from way back when we were still then active in AGOA, rethinking about how do we renew it in 2014, South Africa was facing a situation where it was categorized as a higher upper middle income country, and it was about to be graduated out of that. Had we began at that time to say, okay, you are graduating us out, let's then negotiate a free trade agreement, we would have been far. That's what we need to do with the US. But at the same time, we need to diversify and move with speed in opening up as many markets as we can in the Gulf countries, in Asia, and of course in other regions of the world, but not as a replacement of the US, but on adding on a diversity of countries that we can go to. But that will be the medium-term approach. In the near term, we do still need to access the US market.
All right, I think that's a good point for us to leave it. Thank you for spending some time with me this afternoon. That's Wandile Sihlobo, who is the Chief Economist of the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, and also joining us, Chief Economist and Director at Econometrics, Dr. Azar Jammine. So that's how it's looking, and that's how it's been looking over the last few days in as far as the tariffs conversation is concerned. Stand by. On the other side of this break, we pick up the conversation around the movement known as Fees Must Fall. Can you believe it? It's been 10 years since those protests rocked higher education in the country. We put it under the spotlight in just a moment. Hey, welcome back. You're watching the Weekend Review on SABC News. Now, it was a moment that shook the foundations of higher education in this country. A decade ago, can you believe it? It was in 2015, the voices of students rose in unison under the banner of #Fees Must Fall, a movement that demanded more than just a halt to tuition fee increases. It called for free, decolonized and accessible education for all. 10 years later, we gather to reflect, to question and to ask, where are we now with regard to those struggles? From the historic steps of Wits University and UCT to continued hunger strikes and registration battles in 2025, the spirit of fallism persists, but so do the challenges. Financial exclusion, lack of student housing, and an arguably incomplete decolonization process continue to burden today's students. So we went out to the streets and engaged with some students. We asked them, what did Fees Must Fall truly achieve? What remains undone? And what will it take to ensure that the next generation doesn't inherit the same struggles? Take a look at what we found.
It's still 10 years later and students are still facing the same struggles that were happening like back before. Like for example, right now there's a hunger strike at Wits. Students are being deregistered. Even for myself it was a problem because imagine not having money for registration fee, then you are unable to study because of the registration fee.
When I was registering at first, then my NSFAS money didn't come through. So my parents had to take out the money for myself. And then after paying for the registration, that's why I said I only can get the money at the end of the next year, which was already an issue because most students didn't get in because of the registration fee. Another thing I was actually had an issue with the money. It's not really that much the fees because the 1.6, honestly, if you can think about it for food and everything, it's not enough.
Okay, the challenges I feel like students are facing is basically just funding from NSFAS, right? For example, like I remember when I applied for NSFAS, right? It took quite a while for them to even accept me, like towards like end of last year, right? Once I did, they still didn't even pay the registration for me, right? I had to pay it myself, and then later on, that's when they like refunded me, right? But then I still haven't got my usual allowance ever since then.
I think that in this country we're having a serious problem because now education is becoming inaccessible to the masses. This is unacceptable from a government that's been promising change for so long. I mean, if we're fighting for Fees Must Fall, why is there no change? Why are there such long lines for NSFAS? NSFAS can't be taking time to pay because some people need this money. Not everyone can go home on a weekend. Not everyone can call their mom or their dad and say, can I please have 1,000 or this, that. It needs to change. We need a change now, not yesterday, not 2 weeks ago. We need it now because we can't live how we're living. Personally, I'm not going to say I'm one of them, but I understand the pain and how this is affecting millions of lives. We can't have education in this country and yet masses can't access it. Fees must fall.
Yeah, so that's some of what we found when we took to the streets and engaged students in 2025. So we are marking this milestone. Let's hear now from three voices who each hold a powerful stake in the legacy as well as the future of student activism. I'm joined by Busisiwe Siabe, who was on the front lines of Fees Must Fall, as well as Dr. Mamokgethi Phakeng. She is a long-time serving academic, but also former UCT Vice Chancellor. Good afternoon to both of of you, and thank you for joining me. We are meant to be joined by a third guest, who is Siviwe Mafuna, who is a current student at Wits University, and will bring that perspective that talks to where things stand at the moment. But for a moment, let's rewind the clock and go back. Let me start with you, Busisiwe. I remember years ago, it was 10 years ago, and it's hard to believe that a whole decade has passed since the fees must fall, the roads must fall and fees must fall movements. Just take me back to what the objectives were and what it felt like to be living in that moment. Did you, as part of that generation, realize the kind of impact that you were going to have, and in many ways, the kind of history that you were helping to write?
Thank you very much for having me. I think it's important to remember that the Fees Must Fall movement was not just a student protest, but it was in essence a rupture in the colonial apartheid university system. It exposed for us, and this is what we were trying to do as a generation, is that we were trying to expose the lie of transformation in post-1994 South Africa and in this democratic dispensation. So in essence, it's important for us to remember that Fees Must Fall was not just about the fees themselves. It was in essence a cry, from the gut of a generation that understood that education under capitalism in a settler colonial state like South Africa is not just a tool of liberation, but it was often used and continues to be used as a tool of violence. And what we did is that we stood up against not just access to institutions of higher learning, but we also wanted and we were fighting for, the radical reimagining of those institutions and what we call universities and TVETs today. So Fees Must Fall, was somewhat of an anti-colonial struggle. It wasn't just about fees, as I mentioned. It was about dismantling the white supremacist capitalist structure of higher education. Yeah.
Dr. Mamokgethi Phakeng, your own reflections a decade later. You were already in academic leadership at that point. And I remember, at least from an outsider looking in, it felt to me that you as leaders of academic institutions were being challenged to question even practices and policies that had been in place for many decades that some of you didn't necessarily see as problematic until the voices of these young people came up. Am I correct in sort of remembering it that way?
Come again? Thank you very much for inviting me. Let me explain that in 2015, I was Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation at UNISA. I only got to UCT in July 2016. And it is true that the Roads Must Fall movement raised important issues that should have been raised a long time ago. But of course, if you look at the history of UCT, you would see that the statue of Rhodes at UCT hasn't been sitting comfortably, because Rhodes himself is a controversial figure, not only for Black people, but also for Afrikaners, given the Anglo-Boer War, right? But let me focus on because I think Busisiwe mentioned a very important thing. There's a tendency to say Roads Must Fall was about fees. And as important as fees are, and I will explain why fees are important, as important as they are, the focus on roads and roads falling, it really is fighting against coloniality. The fact that Rhodes used his political power to expropriate land from Black Africans at the time when he was leading the Cape Colony, when he was Prime Minister of the Cape Colony. Even the positioning of the statue at UCT needed to be problematized. So the Roads Must Fall was a symbolic act, in my view, to bring the legacy of Rhodes down, the legacy to challenge the coloniality. But in my view, you don't challenge coloniality by just saying pay our fees. You challenge coloniality by engaging also with what coloniality brought in the academy. And in the academy, it wasn't just that the Rhodes statue came there. Coloniality shaped what higher education has become. And so that's why the call for Rhodes to fall came with the decoloniality calls, okay, to decolonize the university, to decolonize the curriculum, to decolonize ways of being, seeing, and doing. That's important. And of course, once you start doing that, then someone asks, how do we do this? And then I would say, well, you do that through scholarship. Scholarship, not just noise.
Yeah.
Okay, noise draws attention. Okay, noise draws attention. That's what protest does. Draws attention, makes us all sit up and listen. Once we listen, you get into the scholarship. But here's the thing. If you do not have the resources to get into the university, register and pursue scholarship, then you can't even engage. And that's why the fees become relevant.
Yeah.
The fees are not a precursor to it's that why they're relevant.
Yeah.
The reason why we want Black students to come into university and study is because we want their scholarship. That's the only way Rhodes is going to fall.
That will advance the decolonization agenda. Yeah, that's an important point that you make. But Busisiwe, let me just rewind back to something you mentioned. So we are talking about decolonization symbolized by that statue. And I remember the visuals. I mean, I think I was in the studio at the time broadcasting as it unfolded live, as the statue was finally being removed after much of a debate that was playing itself partly in protest. But there's a word you mentioned when we started this conversation about violence of the system. And I remember distinctly, it was part of your discourse, even at the time, 2015, 2016. What does that mean? I mean, we asked that question at the time, but I guess for everyone who perhaps may have missed what the language about violence was all about, because I remember that you also came under pressure and a fair amount of criticism, with some people saying that the protests themselves were violent on the part of the students. But you were raising a systemic violence conversation. What was that about?
So we must remember that, in essence, universities were never designed for Black liberation, right? They were built to assimilate us into a system that still sees Blackness as disposable. And this disposability of Blackness is what, to a large extent, facilitates violence within institutions of higher learning, right? Because institutions and universities are still anti-Black, they're still patriarchal and colonial, physically, epistemologically, and structurally as well. We understand all of that to then, deposit some sort of violence on Black individuals in educational spaces. And what we found during the Fees Must Fall movement was that our existence and the response from not only institutions but the state was a very violent kind of response to a call that we had made, and this was, post 1994, and that had been made in universities that are considered to be, historically Black institutions like UKZN, that they had been making around transformation. So the response and the kind of education and epistemology that we were being confined to and indoctrinated with in institutions of higher learning, mimicked and were very violent in their approach, in their manner, and in their epistemology as well. And this kind of violence was the kind of violence that, the Fees Must Fall movement rose to challenge and rose to stand against, right? And to a large extent, when we decided to resist, the kind of violence that we were met with in institutions of higher learning, then you would have the state and the universities themselves bringing on private security and physically brutalizing students for peacefully protesting. Because we must remember that the Fees Must Fall movement started as a peaceful protest by students in response to not only colonial statues and the colonial history of our universities, but also to the fee increment that was announced as well, which would mean that, poor people continued to be marginalized and pushed out of institutions of higher learning. And that poverty on its own and how it was facilitated and how poor people were being treated on university campuses was also another form of violence that we wanted to deal with. But unfortunately, the kind of violence that we were met with by institutions of higher learning and by the state meant that we had to take a more militarized approach to dealing with, the call for free, quality, decolonized education. And the responses as well from vice chancellors like Professor Mogeti was one of the things that we needed to navigate around when dealing with these tools of violence.
All right, ladies, let me pause for a moment and bring in one of our viewers who wants to weigh in on this conversation before we switch to what was achieved and what remains outstanding. I'm joined by Jane from Pretoria. Good afternoon, Jane. You want to weigh in on this conversation?
Yes, I want to weigh in this conversation because I'm also a victim of high fees that we are paying in universities.
Yeah, say more. In what way are you a victim of high fees, and what do you believe is not being done, and the impact of those high fees on access to higher education?
Yes, I'm a student in UNISA right now. I'm doing a Bachelor of Degree in Social Work, and I'm paying a lot of money.
Yeah.
For 8 modules, I have to pay 17,000. Imagine.
Yeah.
Where do I get that money? Because where I'm working, I'm also getting a less salary. The salary is not increasing, but I have to pay too much for learning.
Yeah.
So I'm saying fees must fall.
Oh, thank you for that. That's Jane in Pretoria. They're weighing in on that conversation. So, Dr. Pakeng, let me bring it back then. The points that are being made by Jane seem to echo that the cry for fees must fall, as she said there right at the end, continues to echo a decade later. But what is the actual assessment, at least from those of you who were at the coalface and continue to be at the coalface of academia? What was achieved by that movement?
I mean, the must fall movements were profoundly about political change and part of a larger challenge to the ruling elite. And in essence, confronting constitutional agnosticism, corruption, and white privilege. In a way, those conversations went to the front. And of course, we should also realize that they were not limited to South Africa, because the deeper issues of inequality and cultural alienation are urgent international issues.
Yeah.
So during the same period, that's why during the same period, we also saw student protests flare up in many countries around the world, including the Netherlands and so on. So for us in South Africa, this approach by students, of course, it's also not new. It's not new. We know the story of South Africa is a story of political activism. And as uncomfortable as it can be, and by the way, that's what protests should do. Protest must make those of us in leadership positions uncomfortable. If protest doesn't do that, then it's not protest.
Yeah.
So the fact that you feel uncomfortable about the approach or whatever is neither here nor there. That's what protest must do. Because when you feel uncomfortable, you start the conversation. And of course, we can say at that time, it's very easy. By the way, fees must fall. The roads must fall was in March. The fees must fall started in October 2015. Okay? And that's when the fee increment went to double-digit numbers. Be patient a little bit. Okay? That's when it went to double-digit numbers. Okay? And the two came together very well because they work together.
Yeah.
Okay? They influence one another.
Yeah.
Because even if we paid school fees, varsity fees for everybody, and nothing changed in the university and how the coloniality remains, there wouldn't have been much achievement. But the biggest achievement is that every university started conversations about what does this decolonization mean for them, for their curriculum, for the way of doing things. Secondly, we know that the former president then changed the rules for NSFAS. First of all, the double-digit fees never were implemented, and NSFAS, which used to be a loan, stopped being a loan. And it doesn't matter. I mean, we are so far from where we should be. But to be honest with you, we are way above any country on
Right.
this continent and many countries.
Unfortunately,
in the world,
I've got to
there's
leave
many
it there.
students who are getting free education at
Yeah.
the moment.
No,
It's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
But it's important what's been achieved so far.
All right, I've got to thank both of you. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time. That's Dr. Mamokgethi Phakeng. She's former UCT Vice Chancellor, as well as Busisiwe Siyabe, an activist who was right at the forefront of the movement that was known as Fees Must Fall a decade ago. Stand by. In the next few minutes, we'll take you to the conversation about the inaugural policing summit. And we ask the question, what was achieved by a summit in a country facing this war against crime? That conversation in a moment here on The Week in Review. Hey, welcome back. Following the 3-day National Policing Summit, the Ministry of Police, as well as the SAPS's top management, held a media briefing to give an overview of the summit and the resolutions that will be implemented. Kempton Park in Gauteng was the focal point for the National Police Summit from the 8th to the 10th of April. Law enforcement officers and experts from across the country came together to discuss and address critical challenges facing the police. Over the course of 3 days, delegates focused on key issues aimed at reducing the murder rate, tackling the proliferation of illegal firearms, and enhancing police presence instead of mere police visibility within communities. So let's take that conversation further then. I'm joined by Roelof Viljoen, who is from Business Against Crime, as well as Mary de Haas, who's from Violence Monitor. Good afternoon to the both of you. So let me start with you, Roelof. And I take it you were part of the conversations, and from that conversation we hear about trends in as far as crimes are concerned. The dominant provinces, we are told, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, consistently accounting for the bulk of the crimes that are committed. From the conversations that were happening there, did you get a sense that we were talking as a country that is facing a war on crime instead of more talk shop?
Definitely. Thank you for having me. The most important one is a lot of previous conversations like this was up to the National Commissioner. But we're very proud to have had even the President in that meeting on Tuesday in the opening. And so it's really an emphasis on getting everyone aligned to look at the same targets.
But I'm asking myself the rule of, it feels to me and to many South Africans that we're at a point of emergency in as far as the crime situation is concerned. Do you believe that there was value in having a summit as opposed to implementing many of the plans that had been outlined in months and years prior to the summit?
What is important there is now there's a point in time where we are all understand the same principles. And now there's no excuse for anyone that was there to say he doesn't know. So most of it was to put a point in time where we know where we are, and then agree together on what is the priorities. Because I mean, we are limited in what we can do in terms of resources, so we have to prioritize.
All right. Mary, let me bring you into this conversation. Mary de Haas from Violence Monitor. Just tell me, in your reading, how important a conversation was this about having a summit on policing and bringing in all of these stakeholders at this point in our fight against crime?
Look, I think it always helps to get people together to talk about these things and to try and find solutions. I think what's important, because I mean, I have seen a lot of these happen over the years. And I mean, I was at one 20 or more years ago about what was it going to do about organized crime. And since then, organized crime has gone from strength to strength, and policing has got worse and worse. So, I mean, I think what the important thing is that whatever came out of this now is indeed acted upon. You know, it mustn't just disappear off the radar. I think whatever was, there was consensus about. I mean, what I'm curious about, though, is that, and look, I'll be honest, I haven't read the whole report because I haven't seen the media today, but, I mean, I deal with policing day in, day out, and what I'm seeing is I don't know if the subject of corruption came up, because if corruption isn't tackled, you can forget about implementing any of this. We've had, since 2009, we've had the police ruled by nepotism, not competence. That's the one thing. The other thing is we know there's a crisis in crime intelligence, and unless that is dealt with immediately, you can forget about fighting crime. The other thing is there is a national development plan about policing, and we should be implementing that. And that is independent oversight by a policing board and demilitarization.
Yeah.
So the more checks and balances, that's
Right.
what I'm saying.
So, Rulof, you were part of the conversation. Did the topics that Mary is raising come up? Corruption within the policing force, staffing practices, and the degree to which nepotism manifests and results in, a less than capable fighting force in the fight against crime, and the other issues that she raises. Did those come up?
Yes, definitely. All the themes that Mary is referring to was discussed, but as she's saying, a lot of the plans was already made. So the challenge with, and it's a South African challenge in general, is to execute these plans. So the work now thereafter is to take this and then put down targets for the first year and the second year, and making sure that you reach that, and putting the necessary, and that's where private assistance comes in, taking the knowledge that we have, or the skills that we have in the private side, and making that available to part with these projects and implementation.
So just lastly then, as we part ways, Rulof, let me just end it off with you. The partnership between business and the state in fighting crime. Part of the conversation I picked up had to do with digitizing some of the systems, case dockets, and we know about the issue of dockets going missing, more DNA testing labs in every province. Many South Africans facing scourges such as sexual violence will say that conversation is quite urgent. Do you have implementable points with timelines and responsibilities assigned to ensure that the synergies between yourselves and government are realized, such that these issues are not part of the next policing summit next year?
What has to be done, and that's the principle of our MOU with the police, is for every work stream, as we call it, we used to call it projects, but projects have an end time. Obviously, there will be projects within these work streams, but the first step is to set up and that's the principle of the governance of this kind of work, is to set up a steering committee that, with all the stakeholders in that specific area and the area of interest, and then setting the goals, the first period goals, and then making sure that you reach that, and then be able to in 5 years say we have reached point A, B, and C. Regarding digitization, the whole principle is that from the moment an incident happens, is to bring in digitization, because the only way we're going to so it's a real redesign of how we're recording information. One of the principles is a policeman's little black book has to change to some electronic device. And obviously there's challenges in that. So there's a major change management that has to happen. But what we hope to do is in these 5 stations, at least on the ground level, I mean, it's 5 out of 1,100. So even if you do it in this 5, there's still a lot of work to do thereafter to change.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time this afternoon. That's Rulof Viljoen, who is from Business Against Crime South Africa. I was also joined on the line by Violence Monitor Mary de Haas, talking the Policing Summit. So let's do things slightly different this time around. Instead of diving into a big jargon, facts and figures laden discussion with an economist, we thought, why not get the raw, unfiltered perspectives of a real family on how the looming VAT increase, if it comes into effect on the 1st of May, will impact their everyday life. We have invited a super cute family to join us in studio this afternoon. Meet Ringeta Njozela and her daughter, Tehila. Ringeta is going to give a mock budget speech to Tehila about the upcoming VAT increase and how it will affect their household. But there's also this twist. Some of the things that will be getting cut, yes, cuts are happening. Some of the things that will be getting cut from the grocery list and the budget, the domestic budget, might just shock Tehila. In case you missed it, the National Treasury and the South African Revenue Service are all set to introduce a 0.5 percentage point increase in VAT this coming May, and this followed by another 0.5 percentage point increase in April next year. Those moves were announced in the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's second round of budget speech, and they are part of efforts to boost government revenue. Now, Ringeta, we know that you've got a plan in mind to tackle the VAT increases and how they're going to impact your family. So take it away. Tehila is here. Yeah. We want to know, how are you grappling with the VAT increase and how do you translate it to her?
Honestly, it's really tough. I mean, just already it has been a tough time, but just thinking about how everything's going to go up and, you know, I had to look at things like the kids' extramural, you know, like we need to choose one, let go of some, you know.
She's all ears. What's in the budget? What's not in the budget?
So it's things like art. We probably need to reduce the amount of times that they go to art now, you know, which is a skill that they're really good at, you know, and things like the fun snacks that would get for them, you know, bathing twice a day, you probably have to do once a day now because, you know, that's it's actually taking a toll in terms of like the electricity, the water. So it's all those things that I need to consider. And then also like helping out basic things that I would normally do, like black text for me, you know, helping out the family. I have to look at that, you know. So it's quite sad. Even going to the hair salon, I've had to be creative and start doing the hair myself. You know, I've tried today, as you can see.
Yeah, I see you did a good job.
Yeah,
you did a great job. You're looking good.
And expensive food. I was telling them the other day, like, yo, the price of Pringles are expensive. Maybe we should buy a maniknet like other kids, you know, because it's quite taxing on me. I've had to look at even having a domestic worker who would come in every day, now reducing it to like 3 times a week, you know, just to try and, so it's like taking away from someone else's income as well. So it has been quite a frustrating thing to, you know.
I'm going to pause for a moment at the top of the hour, but we will continue with the conversation after that. But I want to bring you in, Tehila. How old are you? And just tell me a little bit about yourself.
I am 13 years old. I'm in grade 7 and I go to Montrose Primary School.
Yeah. And do you understand any of this conversation? You know, the grown-ups are talking about VAT and the budget, and do you understand it, or do you just understand that you're getting lesser and lesser of the things that you really like and enjoy?
I understand a bit, like a little bit.
Tell me what you understand.
The prices of things have gone higher, and we have to like stop using as much things as we do, like water and electricity, to try and save money.
Yeah. All right, let's pause for a moment. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and we will pick it up in just a moment. You're watching the Weekend Review here on SABC News. Hey, welcome back. You're watching the Weekend Review on SABC News. It's our regular gathering spot for us to pause at the summit of the week and reflect on the key and consequential news developments that impact our country, our continent, and the world. So let's get to your headlines for this hour. The French arms manufacturer Thales says it is unable to conduct a defense in the corruption case of former President Jacob Zuma, in which it is a co-accused. The High Court in Pietermaritzburg in KwaZulu-Natal will hear the case on the 24th of this month. The case relates to alleged fraud and corruption in a 1999 multi-billion rand arms deal. Justice Leona Teron emphasized that legislation alone won't eradicate gender-based violence and femicide. A mindset shift is crucial. She made the statement at the 17th biennial conference of the International Association of Women Judges, and that gathering was taking place in Cape Town, and it highlighted the need for a deeper change in societal attitudes to effectively combat GBVF. Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. In case you missed the last few minutes, we're having a different take on issues to do with VAT and the budget, the conversation around the national budget. I'm joined by a family who are in studio just grappling with it all, Ringeta and her daughter, Tehila, just a few moments ago. So, Ringeta, if I can ask you, address her directly. She's here. Talk to her about what the realities are. Yeah. We've started receiving letters from service providers priming us that the 0.5% increase will come into effect on the 1st of May. The politicians are telling us, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about, it won't happen. Yeah. But as you are receiving these notifications from the banks, from everyone else, service providers, what are you telling her?
To be honest, I've already started recommending that we start something as a family, like a business, because I've seen they're so good at art, they could start making something just to assist with that.
That's the revenue part of
That's the revenue
of your
part
domestic budget.
Just recommending that we find another different, stream of income, and that mommy will probably have to take on something else. Like already I have my own business that I'm pushing to make sure that I'm bringing extra, because it feels like my 9 to 5 is not grappling with everything that's increasing.
I believe what we have on screen, if you can see that's actually your budget. So just talk us through it.
So basically there's things like growing vegetables at home that I've started doing, which has also helped to minimize the spend in buying, and then also have introduced managing a budget tightly. When we go out, I say to the kids, hey, you have 150 for your meal. You need to work around that. There isn't that room to just get whatever you want, So those are the kind of mindful things that I've started introducing in terms of, for the kids.
Tehila, I'll ask you about this in a moment, but if we can keep that graphic on. Tell me, Ringeta, I see on what you are eliminating, what's bathing once a day to save water? What's that about?
Sure. I think bath time was a leisure. I mean, the kids will sit in the bath in the evening after school and just, fill up the bath, and then until you see the electricity bill and the water bill, and you're like, whoo, okay, I don't think we can manage this. So we need to find a way to work around this. Take a shower, take a bath, because she does love her bath time, So it's things like that where I'm like, okay, we need to manage and pull back on stuff like that.
How do you feel about that, Tehila?
It's like I do like taking baths, but to save money, I wouldn't mind taking a shower and then a bath later. Yeah. Because then I get to bath. I still get to wash 2 times a day, but not wasting water.
Yeah. And do you like the way that mommy does your hair?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So you're happy with that at least?
Yes,
And when she's talking about helping out and you're good with your art and things like those, what's your thinking about lines in which you could assist, in which you could raise money for the family?
So the ideas that we have came up with are making coloring books with our drawings, or making artworks and then selling them online to people.
And modeling.
and what else?
She wants to start modeling as well, so
So she could get an agent.
Exactly,
and possibly get some work going.
Yeah.
But we talk about it almost lightly from time to time, but it's a serious conversation.
It's a serious conversation,
When you're watching the politicians engaging each other and it has become very political, what do you, as a parent, as a working person, make of that conversation, the political conversation?
I think for me, it feels like it hasn't been well thought through about how, the household is actually doing from all these increases, because it doesn't only affect just those basic things we spoke about. I have to look at my medical aid going up, insurance, all of that is actually going to take an impact, and actually even thinking about, is my salary increase going to go up? So all of those things put together is what is stressing us as the common human who is trying to make it into this economical changes.
Yeah, and when you see parties like the EFF and the DA going to court to try and reverse it all, what are your thoughts about that legal process? Do you pin any hope on it that it will stop the VAT increase from coming in?
I really do. I really hope that it will help. I mean, we could use with a couple of years of, just sticking to where we are right now with the 14%. So, yeah, it going up now, it really is going to be tight. Kids have seen how stressed I've been personally from a financial point of view, and how I've been trying to make ends meet just to balance everything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it would help.
And then, if I can, two questions that I want to ask you, Ringeta. If you were to address the politicians who are dealing with this, and part of the reason we brought you here is to put a human face to it all. It's quite easy for it to become political ping pong, right? It's all fascinating. We're all watching.
Yeah.
Now the Action SA is saying this, now the DA is saying that, and they are at each other's throats. Now the EFF is intervening, and the ANC is saying, where are we going to get the money? So if you were to address all of them, what's the level of sensitivity and understanding of household budgets do they need to take into this conversation?
Yeah. I think for me, more than anything, is that we have to look at how this has affected not only just myself, the fact that I've had to take away employment for my helper and reduce to 3 days a week, it has already affected how my life is going to be, and these changes are actually quite intense. And I would say that all
right, Ringeta, I'm sorry, I've got to move very quickly and go to Samgele Masego, who is in conversation with the Umkhonto we Sizwe Party's Secretary General Floyd Shivambu.
I'm going to speak. You can hold it by yourself.
I can't. They don't want me in their shots, these people.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so as you can see, the members of the media setting up and getting ready to speak to Floyd Shivambu. I believe he's starting to make his comments. They are in Sandton for the inaugural Jacob Zuma lecture. Let's listen in.
Former President Zuma, the essence of this lecture today, what is going to be the thrust of it?
Now look, we as Umkhonto we Sizwe are having nationwide celebrations of the birth date of our Commander General and President Jacob Zuma. And the theme for all these lectures which we're going to conduct in all provinces of South Africa is to now contest the narrative that President Zuma has wasted South Africa's opportunities when he was head of state and president. It was 9 wasted years. So we're going to firmly speak about his legacy, his revolutionary contributions to revolutionary politics in South Africa, but also to articulate his vision as to what becomes the agenda moving forward in terms of total emancipation and full realization of the Freedom Charter objectives. And this is part of the build-up to the inaugural President Jacob Zuma lecture, which is going to be held on the 26th of June 2025. So we are going to launch President Jacob Zuma's lecture series, which will then become an annual event from there on. So this is just part of the build-up. We've got activities that are taking place in Mpumalanga, in Limpopo, in the Western Cape, in KwaZulu-Natal, in all parts of South Africa. These activities at provincial, regional and sub-regional level. And a lot of branches as well are having different activities to have a solid narrative of President Zuma as a revolutionary, as an honest revolutionary, who has championed the cause and interest of the people. The details of what we're going to talk about we'll explain when we're making the lecture today here in Soweto. I think that is clear.
I
I'd like to find out about your campaign, the campaign in terms of what you say are the stolen votes. Yesterday, your youth league basically had a march that didn't seem to resonate very much with your membership or supporters. It was not very well attended. What is the status there? How do you feel maybe people's understanding of what it is that you're trying to do there?
No, look, Mkhonto Wesizwe has got rolling programs that are multifaceted in terms of My Vote Counts campaign. That is part of the campaign. So all our leagues, the student movement, the women's league, the youth league, the religious movement, are at any given point resounding the voice that elections were not free and fair. A lot of votes of Mkhonto Wesizwe were stolen. We have got empirical evidence as Mkhonto Wesizwe leadership that the votes were stolen. That is why we're going to court. We cannot waste the resources to go to court to challenge this. So we're building on that. So the Youth League does its own program, and the Women's League does its own program. Individual activists do their own programs as part of conscientizing society that the elections outcome of May 29, 2024 are not a reflection of the will of the people. So it's just part of the rolling programs which are happening. And we think that what the Youth League did yesterday was commendable in terms of the programs, in terms of the scale which they were mandated to work on. We think it's a commendable numbers that they received, and they will continue to consolidate in other parts of South Africa as well to demonstrate that the outcomes of the 2024 general elections are not a reflection of the will of the people. We're going to talk inside about other things. Yes.
Yeah. Going to be did you receive a letter from Fikile Mbalula? Will you be meeting the ANC on the fiscal budget framework of the country and the budget? Then lastly, the MK's posture on President Donald Trump's view of South Africa, and in particular him saying that he may not be coming to the G20 summit.
No, look, we got a letter from the ANC Secretary General, and we responded to say we do not want to enter into domestic affairs of the government, the so-called government of national unity. If they've got budget impasse, it's their own issue. They've constituted a government with representatives of the colonial system, of racism, of apartheid. So they must see to finish as to how they handle their own issues. They can't utilize us as some spare wheel which they're going to utilize to scare the Democratic Alliance. That no, for them to win their immediate gains, they will go to MK, and then MK will then rush as if we're desperate for power. We know that as Mkhonto Wesizwe will represent majority of the people of South Africa, we are not desperate to enter into power through the ANC coalition or arrangement. We can take power single-handedly as an organization. We have got the necessary capacity to take power by ourselves. That is why less than 6 months into existence, Mkhonto Wesizwe could get upward of 14% of the vote in South Africa and have an outright majority in the province of KwaZulu-Natal in terms of the votes that were announced by the IEC, not in terms of the true reflection of the outcomes which we are still contesting now. So the ANC has written to us. We have responded to say that we do not want to enter into domestic affairs of the so-called government of national unity. Let them deal with their issues. We have got the relevant platforms as MK where we're going to articulate our position in terms of what is to be done in relation to the budgeting framework, in terms of the money bills that are still going to serve before Parliament. But one thing for sure is that as long as the government of national unity or any government includes the Democratic Alliance and all these other aspects, we are not going to allocate any budget as Mkhonto Wesizwe to representatives of oppression to expand on land, on basic education. We will never support that budget. That is one issue which we have clearly articulated. I think the issue we have consistently articulated as well in relation to the United States of America is that let's adhere to the vision of President Jacob Zuma on building sustainable relationships with the BRICS countries. It's President Zuma who joined BRICS because he could foresee that the imperialist West will always want to bully the global South. And that is exactly what is happening now, that you must be told today tariff is 20%, is 30%, you must change trade relations and all of those things there. We have got sustainable friendships that started when President Zuma was head of state and president, with Brazil, with Russia, with China, with India. That group of countries constitute almost 40% of the global population. That is a very huge market. Their economy combined is more than these countries of imperialism, the neo-colonial countries which oppress the African continent. So America, UK, France, Japan, and all of those things in the G7, their economies are far smaller than the countries in the BRICS basket. And President Zuma has given us a compass as South Africa, as a people, that this is the direction that we must go. So South Africa should intensify its relationship with the BRICS countries. Must utilize this 90-day period to now look for alternate markets, because you can't trust the imperialist West. They are always self-seeking. Their relationship between themselves and the African continent has been a relationship of exploiter and exploited. Has been a relationship of a rider and a horse, the horse being the African continent, towards which direction we do not know. So we've got a relationship that we must protect, and we again thank President Jacob Zuma on his birthday for giving us a compass of working within the BRICS framework. Thank you very much.
Floyd. That is Floyd Shivambu, the Secretary General of the MK Party, who is essentially speaking on the matters pertaining to this lecture on former President Jacob Zuma, and also speaking on the matters pertaining to the meeting that was sought by the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Fikile Vutambalula, on the reconstitution of the government of national unity. There, Floyd Shivambu saying that they will not enter the domestic affairs of the so-called government of national unity, saying that he's going to be speaking behind me in this lecture on the lives and times of former President Jacob Zuma, particularly on those 9 years which he was the head of state.
All right, thank you for that. That's Samgele Masego there reporting live for you from Sandton, where the inaugural Jacob Zuma lecture is going to be held by the Mkhonto weSizwe Party. Let's move on to the story now. South Africans are already feeling the squeeze, and come the 1st of May, the cost of living could rise again with a 0.5% VAT increase. But now in a political twist that may surprise many, two parties, often seen at opposing ends, the DA and the EFF, have found something of common ground on this matter. They are both challenging the legality of the way Parliament adopted the new fiscal framework and questioning whether the finance minister should have the constitutional authority to hike VAT without proper parliamentary approval. The Democratic Alliance filed its court application first, arguing that the adoption of the fiscal framework was deeply flawed and that the process used to push through the VAT increase is unconstitutional. The EFF has since joined the case, calling Parliament's actions a quote-unquote rubber stamp for the executive. The case is heading to the High Court later this month. But to unpack it all, I'm joined by Advocate Lufuno Nevodwe, a constitutional law expert. Good afternoon, Advocate. Thank you for your time. So the natural question, I think, for anyone watching this would be, isn't it that Parliament, the legislature, is a separate arm of government with the ability, the constitutional ability and authority to, take decisions such as these, even if it's at the peril of the sustainability of the government of the day, in that in future their unpopularity could be punished by the voters. They are at large to make those mistakes if they so wish. So put for us in context then this application by the DA, now joined by the EFF, that seeks to challenge what some may view as a decision taken by the majority in committees as well as in the National Assembly.
Yes, I think we first of all, the DA and all other parties, I think they are now supported by the EFF. They are within their constitutional right to challenge the parliamentary processes. But now the question will be whether in their constitutional challenge, do they present a tangible effect or evidence in terms of how the constitutional processes were or the parliamentary, not constitutional process, the parliamentary processes were unfolding. You will know now that the Minister of Finance has presented the budget speech, which was delayed by 3 weeks, which was finally presented in Parliament on the 12th of March. And after the presentation of the budget speech, there is a need now for the voting in terms of the budget speech, in terms of what the minister, as part of the executive, has presented, those proposals, which also include the contentious issue of the VAT increase for 0.5% for this financial year, and also 0.5% for the next financial year. So we have seen it out in Parliament, wherein they were voting on the budget speech, which also include VAT and all other issues which were presented in the budget speech. So we have seen the voting process, which happened in the National Assembly and which also happened in the National Council of Provinces. So in this voting process, the Democratic Alliance as a political party represented in Parliament, and the Economic Freedom Fighters as a political party also represented in Parliament, we have seen them participating in these processes. They voted in terms of opposing the budget, and also opposing the VAT increase. And we have seen the numbers, because remember, in terms of the numbers, is that the decision of the majority stand. So, of course, the election was too close, so because the margin was not that much higher, but the DA and the EFF have lost the vote. Because how Parliament works, they work on majoritarian rule. In other words, if there is a matter where parliamentarians are not agreeing on a matter, they will debate, but after debating, the House will need to be divided in terms of voting.
Sure.
So voting was done, and the majority voted in favor of the
So on that note, Advocate, to what extent is that majoritarianism the rule that says where a matter has to be put to the vote, the views of the majority will prevail? To what extent is that tempered by the procedural requirements? Because the way I understand it, the EFF and the DA are challenging why they don't support the VAT substantively, the VAT increase as a matter of principle, on the substantive issue. But it seems to me that they're carving their challenge based on procedures that were followed. To what extent do those procedures temper that majoritarianism that plays itself in votes such as this one?
Yes, remember they are challenging the procedural processes within Parliament, which supposed to be followed. But it was going to be much more understandable if the DA and the EFF and those who were opposed to VAT and budget, which has been presented to Parliament, did not participate on the processes. Remember they had the opportunity. Upon them realizing that the processes which were followed were invalid, they were not in accordance with the Constitution, and they were also not in accordance with the rules of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. They were supposed to have even not participate at all, not even vote, because remember, we were not even going to talk about this vote we are talking about. But we are talking about this vote because that is the process which need to be followed in the National Assembly and also National Council of Provinces. And now, we now know the outcome of that voting process, which was not in favor of the DA and also the Economic Freedom Fighters and other political parties which were in support of their position. So now, the way democracy works is that you don't wait, you don't contest a vote and you lose the contest, and you now say, no, I'm challenging the whole process because I feel that the process is flawed, the process is not in line with the rules of parliament, or is not in line with the constitution. Because remember, our constitution, in a constitutional democracy, where after you have debated on an issue and you are not in agreement, how you divide the house is through the voting. So the voting here was done, which was transparent, even fair. Even us as members of the public, I mean, we have watched the proceedings of the vote. We have seen we didn't see any process which was tempered here. We see a fair process where parliamentarians were at ease. They then exercise their constitutional rights to vote and vote in favor. Others vote not in favor. But
so let me point out, Advocate, one of the flaws that I heard at least the EFF raise, at least from their perspective. They are saying this was a flaw. If I recall the argument correctly, it goes along the lines of, at no point was the report that came out of the committees, the Finance Committee of Parliament, at no point was that report put to the members of the committee to say, having had this discussion and pulled in different directions, we now put this report to the vote. Those in support say aye, and those against say no. That, in essence, is how I understood them to be arguing, that in that way, the procedures were not followed.
Yes, that is the argument. But you must then remember that committees of parliament, they make a recommendation to the National Assembly and also to the National Council of Provinces. After whether they are in favor of that recommendation or not, the parliament now, the National Assembly, must then vote on that motion, and the National Council of Provinces must then vote on the motion. Of course, remember, they are raising all of these technicalities, but whatever they recommend is not what Parliament is not binded by that recommendation. Remember, they have to vote. Remember, they have to consider whatever they are putting before them, debate it, and then vote on it. So that technicality itself, it does not change the final decision which has been taken, because at the end of the day, when you are in a committee, you are a number of people who are not even in majority in terms of the whole National Assembly and also National Council of Provinces. So you still have to, your decision still has to be tested in the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, which in this case it was done, and it was not in favor of the DA and the economic.
Advocate, I want to go to the last point in our conversation. Ahead of the case being heard, what is your understanding of the nature of the case that is being brought? Is it a typical administrative law challenge that seeks to challenge, an exercise of public power that has an impact on rights, or is it an attack on a kind of legislation, and what are the limitations there in terms of the courts intervening in what is in essence an exercise of legislative power versus administrative action, as you and I understand it?
Yes, well, how I understand is that we do have separation of powers in South Africa in a constitutional democracy. This separation of powers, it then talks about checks and balances. So the judiciary, its role is to interpret and apply the law. So where the law has not been applied, or where the rules has not been applied, where the constitution has not been applied, then the judiciary will then intervene. So here, you remember, the legislative arm has the responsibility to pass budget. They also have a responsibility to provide oversight on the work of the executive. So if there was if the process they followed was not flawed, so of course the judiciary won't tamper with the decision which has been taken.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time and your insights this afternoon. That's Advocate Rufuno Nevodwe, who is a constitutional law expert. You're watching the week in review here on SABC News. Coming up in the next few minutes, we'll be talking about safety in the courts. What in the light of that incident a few days ago, where someone was shot inside a court in Wynberg in Cape Town. That conversation coming up in just a moment. Hey, welcome back. You're watching the Weekend Review on SABC News. The fatal shooting of a 50-year-old taxi owner at the Wynberg Magistrates Court in Cape Town earlier this week has seen safety in courts throughout the country being brought into question. The victim was gunned down inside the court by an unidentified man who managed somehow to enter the court without the weapon being detected. This has caused terror and has shaken the justice system. The chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Constitutional Development, Xola Nqola, condemned the brazen behavior of the gunmen, saying, however, that during their oversight visits to various courts in KwaZulu-Natal last month, they found most of the metal detectors at those courts not functioning. So earlier this year, you'll remember the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development confirming a fatal shooting of a 27-year-old murder case witness just meters from the Lenasia Magistrates Court entrance where the deceased was due to testify. Another similar case is the gunning down of a key witness in a trial and another male witness just outside the Randburg Magistrates Court, and that happened towards the end of 2023. So let's take that conversation further then. I'm joined by three guests that will give us their insights this afternoon. The spokesperson for the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, that's Terence Manasseh, as well as the member of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Constitutional Development, Oscar Matafa, as well as the chairperson of the Law Society, the criminal law element of that, that is William Booth, a veteran lawyer. They all join us now. Let me start with you, Terence, before I turn to the other guests in a moment. Terence, this is a shocking incident to have happened, and I think it differs from the other incidents in that until now we've been talking about incidents outside of the court perimeter. But this time around, there's no debating that this was a failure of security inside the court. Tell me what the reaction is and the response is from the ministry to this shocking incident.
Thank you for acknowledging the first incident at the Wynberg Magistrate Court. We are correct, the few others that happened recently, and we extend our condolences to those who are affected. We condemn these incidences in the strongest terms. And on this one of the Wynberg Magistrate Court, I want to clarify one thing. In our report indicated that it was witness. However, it emerged that it's indeed an accused.
Terence, I'm terribly sorry. Terence, I'm terribly sorry. The line is not so great. I don't know if you can move around and maybe we try and get you on a better line. We're simply not getting the benefit of the conversation because we're hearing almost every second word. Let me see if the line has improved if you move around a little bit, Terence. You wanted to correct something in the report. Just pick it up from that point.
How is it now?
Yeah, I think it's slightly better. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was indicating that our preliminary report was saying it is a witness, and it emerged later that it's an accused. I just wanted to clarify that matter. Our reaction to this one, Mr. Simeran, is that it's indeed shocking. It's not something that's supposed to have happened. We are working with the police on this matter to ascertain exactly what really happened on this matter. But the part of the preliminary report that we got was that our metal detector was not working. This incidences happened at a time. You would recall that our minister is new in this portfolio. These incidences happened at a time when she has committed to visit all the courts to checked the status of service delivery, including infrastructure and security issues. And these are the things that, in some instances, we pick them up, and we are working with the Public Works Department. We are working with other stakeholders involved to ensure that we improve security on this matter.
Terence, you're saying in this instance the metal detectors were not working. Why were there no, fallback and backup plans to back up that system? So, I mean, you build in redundancy. If this system fails, the next system should kick in. Ordinarily in other buildings, when you're walking in where metal detectors are not working, you are patted down. If you're a man, a male security officer comes and pats you down. And if you're a woman, likewise. Why did that not happen in this case? Or why did that fail?
You are correct, Mr. Simelane. It's a standard operating procedure. In an event where a machine fails, the fallback is that of searching. I suppose what is happening now, the police investigation, the visit by our senior officials to the court is trying to ascertain as to what really happened, with the view that this should not happen again in future. The big prize on this one is to make sure that machines are working at all times. We regret that the information that is coming through at the moment that says that our metal detectors were not working. We regret that what looks like a simple SOP was not really followed. But we are we are working with the management. As indicated, our senior managers, led by the Director General, went to the specific court to try and ascertain what is happening, and we are waiting for that report to speak with authority on what really happened here.
Don't go anywhere, Terence. Please stay on the line. Let me bring in William Booth as well as Oscar Matafa into this conversation. William, for the ordinary citizen watching court processes unfold at magistrates' courts across the country, high courts across the country, this is indeed shocking. And you heard a few minutes ago Terence saying that they as a ministry are also shocked by it all. Are you shocked?
Good afternoon. Yes, obviously. But the issue is that these shootings and attacks have taken place on many occasions in the past. So let's just look at Wynberg Magistrates Court. There was a shooting there a few months ago, just on the steps of the court. There was an attack with a knife inside the court. In this instance, the perpetrators got up 4 floors to the regional court where people sit. Members of the public, lawyers are there, prosecutors, magistrates also move in and out there. The working of the apparatus at the courts, the majority of courts, there's a problem. In the Cape Town Magistrates Court, there is a sign that says the machine is not operating. That sign has been there for at least 6 months. In the corridors of the courts, most courts, but also at Wynberg in particular, the CCTV camera footage was not working. So whoever the perpetrators were could not be caught on camera to try and ascertain their identity, to have them speedily arrested. So it's not something that just happened last week. This is ongoing. And my question is, and I attend numerous committee meetings of the case efficiency throughout the province, in South Africa nationally, and this aspect is always raised. And justice representatives attend those meetings. But yet nothing is done effectively to stop this kind of heinous act and this kind of situation where the security is seriously problematic.
So let's see if Oscar Matafa of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Constitutional Development will have any of the answers that we are seeking this afternoon. But Mr. Matafa, maybe let's start with shocking, yes, but are you surprised that this incident could happen inside a court building?
Good afternoon, Thulasizwe and the other guests on the call. Not really, Thulasizwe. We are not surprised. Actually, for us as a portfolio committee, we raised the security breach as a disaster waiting to happen. And the reason we raised it is that when we did our oversight visit to the KZN division, we've picked up, as Mr. Booth is stating, metal detectors are not working. The number of securities are too few. The court entrances are small. So when they do the manual pat down as a fallback from the X-ray machine not working, that in itself becomes a distraction. That if there's any prohibited object that can be slipped in, it can be slipped in during that process because there is a distraction. We were not entirely happy with the reason that the machines are not working because they are imported and it's difficult for us to have them fixed. We asked about the CCTV footage. Do we have any CCTV cameras? Yes, they are there. Equally, some of them are not working. So it's saddening that our concerns had to be confirmed by such a heinous incident that happened at Wynberg. But maybe let me add to the number of victims that Mr. Booth spoke about. These attacks are not only limited to witnesses. It's an assault on the criminal justice because you remember the Umlazi incident where Mr. Boy, a prosecutor, was gunned down at the entrance of Umlazi Magistrate Court. And our belief is that the problem with the Justice Department and Public Works, they see security as a facilities matter. And we believe that it goes beyond that. It's a strategic risk to the entire justice system. Because if victims and role players in the system do not feel safe, what will motivate them to come forward to try to assist the country get rid of the issue of crime?
So say a bit more about that then. And I'm wondering to what extent you believe, Mr. Matafa, that the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, and perhaps not the current minister, because, you know, as Terence was saying, she is new in the role, but there's continuity in government. The department as a whole, the administrative arm of the department, to what extent should they shoulder the responsibility based on what you are saying, on them viewing this as a facilities matter as opposed to a matter that strikes at the heart of the administration of justice and therefore responding to it at that level?
No, actually, they should shoulder the entire blame. However, we are encouraged by the new minister's commitment in dealing with the issues that have been raised. Why I'm saying they should carry the blame is that the issue of security and poor facilities did not only start with the 7th administration. The 6th parliament, the 5th parliament, these issues have been raised. And our belief is that there was lack of consequence management and accountability in the value chain. Because this matter did not only start with us. We are only going to amplify it because in our visit, we made sure that we invite all the role players from the NPA to the Legal Aid Board, including the Justice and Public Works in between. And these answers that we're receiving were not satisfactory. In some instances, you can hear that these issues is the first time that the Public Works is hearing of them. So the machine breaks down, no one reports it, the situation goes on as per normal. Western Cape, Wynberg, the machine was not working. We came from KZN, the machine was working. What surety do we have that in Mpumalanga, the machines are working there?
Yeah. So, William Booth, let me bring you back in then. I imagine that this must also, other than it being a matter of principle and governance and ensuring that the legal system and the justice system is defended and protected, it must also be a bit of a personal matter for you as well, because you've also survived assassination attempts. What kind of a chilling effect does the specter that a person, a role player in criminal justice, could be gunned down in plain sight in front of everyone? What kind of a chilling effect does it bring into the entire system?
Yes, I think it does obviously affect all the role players, prosecutors, magistrates, lawyers. You're going to get to the position that none of them will want to go to court. In fact, last week in the Wynberg, courts were postponed for 2 or 3 days. So cases couldn't be dealt with. So that causes further delay. And also, very importantly, witnesses are not going to want to come to court. And they're going to say, well, look, there's no protection. So it affects everybody. I mean, lawyers are there to protect their clients. If somebody doesn't like the way they work, they must be reminded the Constitution allows everybody to a fair defense. Prosecutors are there to put forward the case for the state and to prosecute matters. Magistrates objectively look at matters. So if all of these role players are being attacked, they are being affected emotionally, you're not going to be able to do your work. So that affects the whole system.
Yeah.
Witnesses in key cases are going to say, listen, I'd rather stay at home. And one could maybe say, well, let's do it on an audio-visual link. But to run a trial audio-visually is also a problem. Cases can deal with appeals where matters can be argued, but to actually cross-examine a witness on audio-visual link when the witness is not in the same facility is a practical problem.
Yeah. All right, I've got to thank all of my guests for joining me this afternoon, and thank you for sharing your insights. That's William Booth from the Law Society, as well as Oscar Matafa, who is part of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Constitutional Development. We were also joined by the spokesperson of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, Terence Manasseh. Stand by. After the break, we bring you an update on that epic journey that those 3 young men from Limpopo have been undertaking from Limpopo to Cape Town. We have an update for you coming up here on the Weekend Review. Welcome back. Oh man, what a heartwarming story this has been over the last few days. The Gauteng BMX cycling team, made up of Gauteng Mahlakwane, Karabo Moko, and Maxwell Ndou, has reached day 12 of their remarkable cycling journey from Burgersfort to Cape Town, a campaign dedicated to raising awareness about gender-based violence and other social ills affecting South African communities. The cyclists, who have already covered over 1,350 kilometers across 6 provinces, are currently in Laingsburg, a Karoo town approximately 350 kilometers from their final destination, Cape Town. A qualified physician will assess Maxwell's condition, and a medical opinion will advise whether he is fit to cycle the remainder of the journey. Deboho Molakeng, who is the spokesperson of the 3 cyclists, joins us now to give us an update on that situation. So let's start with that update. When we touched base last night in preparation for today with the 3 young men, we were told 1,350 kilometers covered with some 350 remaining. So very close to the final destination. But what's the status now of the young men being able to complete this journey?
Okay, the young men, they remain positive that they'll be able to complete the journey. And the 2 that are remaining behind while they are waiting for the 3rd member to be assessed, they are positive and they are waiting to start again the journey to go to Cape Town. So they are staying positive and they are ready as well to hit the road.
So confirm for us right now, they're still in Laingsburg, is it about the concern for the health of one of the young men?
Yes, they are still in Laingsburg waiting for the report from the physician.
And do you foresee this being a long layover in terms of the condition of Maxwell? Do you foresee this to be a long layover, or is it just precautionary to ensure that he receives the kind of checkups that he needs, and perhaps in a day or 2 they could be up and cycling again and finishing off the journey?
It's a precautionary layoff. We are assessing so that we avoid, if there would be any problem with his health, we avoid having a long layoff. So this one is just precautionary.
Just tell me about their spirits, because this is, as things happen these days on social media, this is a journey that has inspired many people, a lot of people. It quickly became a trending conversation as we see those visuals along one of the stretches of road as they were cycling. Many people joined in and identified with this journey that they are undertaking, and especially the causes behind it. Just take our viewers through what inspired them and what is the objective. It's not just about going from Burgersfort to Cape Town, is it?
Yes, it's not. It's actually, they're trying to address and make an awareness on GBV and to address other social ills that they see from where they're coming from in Burgersfort and other areas in Limpopo. Remember, these boys are coming from a village, and where they are coming from, the place is
somehow, have got those poor backgrounds, and most of the young people in that area, specifically actually in other areas in South Africa, they are facing unemployment. So what the boys are trying to do is to say to the youth that whatever you are able to do, you are able to do with your hands. You can just promote it to create and generate income with it. And also, they are also promoting the sport to say you need to engage in sport to avoid being involved in issues of gender-based violence. So this is what they are trying to promote and making awareness. But moreover, they have brought South Africans together. Every day we are on our screens on social media trying to get an update of how far they are and what they are doing. And at the state of mind that they are in at this present moment, seeing the followership that they've received, from the day they started on the 1st of April to this day, they are positive and they are on high spirit. They welcome the support, as their slogan that they love support. If you've seen their social media posts, they always say that we love support. So they really appreciate the support that they are given by the South Africans and the people on the road when they are passing. So they remain positive and they are in high spirited. But one thing they have said to us this morning is that no soldier will be left behind. So that's the reason why they decided to wait for their brother to see the report and therefore continue after we have received the report from the physician.
All right, I've got to thank you for that update. That's Debo Homolakeng there, speaking on behalf of the 3 young men who are cycling from Burgersfort in Limpopo to Cape Town. They are really close, but they have to pause for a moment because they are now concerned about just taking precaution around the health of one of the 3. So that's how it's looking on this end of the hour as far as the week in review goes. Stand by, the next hour coming up in just a moment. 2 p.m. on the Saturday, the 12th of April, 2025. We are SABC News. We're coming to you live from Auckland Park in Johannesburg. This is the Week in Review, and it's our regular gathering point at the summit of the week, where we pause and reflect on the key developments of the week that are impactful on our lives. So what are we waiting for? Let's get it started. Here are your headlines. Provinces of Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Western Cape and Eastern Cape have their hands full in dealing with crime and will remain on the police's radar. Police Minister Senzo Mchunu says the spate of crime in these 4 provinces is alarming and the areas have been identified as hotspots. After months without elections, Gabon is set to hold presidential elections today. This is the first polls since a 2023 coup that ended the Bongo family's 56-year dynasty. Hey, good afternoon. It's good to be in your company. We are now into the 3rd hour of the show. So let me tell you this at the top of this hour. The recent decision by the US President Donald Trump to impose tariffs on many countries has led to smaller countries such as Lesotho scrambling for solutions. The 50% tariffs imposed on Lesotho that have since been suspended will affect the textile industry in that country, in the Kingdom of Lesotho. There are reports that Lesotho has come up with proposals how the country will deal with the tariffs, and some of the proposed measures are likely going to cause tension in the SADC region. For more on that, I'm joined by Lesotho's Trade, Industry and Business Development Minister, Mokgethi Shelile. Good afternoon to you, Minister, and thank you for making the time to speak to me. Just let me start on a general note. Not long ago, the trending story and the story that everyone was talking about was how Donald Trump was saying Lesotho, a country that no one has ever heard of, to now talking about he knows exactly where Lesotho is and he knows how to hit Lesotho where it hurts the most. Just the irony of it all. Just tell me about how Lesotho has been grappling with the Trump administration's attitude towards these issues.
Let me just start by saying with this issue of a country that no one has ever heard of. Just this morning I was looking at some of the items of clothing, golf clothing that was made in Lesotho for Trump golf. So that goes a long way to show you that I think he was just talking in jest. But on the more serious note, what is happening now is really something that is unheard of, and it lacks all ethos of multilateralism. We do not understand why we have to go back to 1945.
So, Minister, let's talk a bit more about that then, because now we're talking about those so-called Liberation Day tariffs having been paused for 90 days. But you were among the countries on whom the highest tariff, some of the highest tariffs had been imposed. Do you understand as Lesotho why you would get a tariff even higher than South Africa, a country that Donald Trump has made clear that he's got deep problems with?
Yeah, it was explained to us that it's basically a trade deficit that we...
Oh, man. I think we've lost the line to the minister there momentarily. Let's see if we can work.
From the...
All right, I think we've got you back, Minister. Do pick up. You were talking about this has to do with the trade deficit. Is it that the trade deficit is balanced in favor of Lesotho and against the United States?
Yes, we sell more than we get from the United States. That's how it was explained to us. But look, we are a small country, as you know, 2 million people, a less developed, low-income country. There is absolutely no way we can import as much as South Africa does, or maybe Eswatini and any other nations. The economy of Eswatini triples that one of Lesotho. Botswana is 6 times. So the disparities are there, and most probably they will be buying more from the US than we do.
And that's something that not many people would have thought, right, Minister, that a kingdom and a country as small as Lesotho would have that kind of a weight to be able to punch above its weight as far as trading with the United States goes, such that you would have that trade, balanced, being in favor of Lesotho and against the United States. Tell me about the key industries. I know that the textile sector is one of those that really boasts what you export to the United States.
Yeah, it is. It is the largest, but we also do send trout to the US and car seats, but indirectly. The plants in Roslyn, Pretoria, they buy car seats from Lesotho. Then some of the cars end up in the US.
Yeah. So tell me, in light of the decision to pause the implementation of these so-called Liberation Day tariffs by 90 days, are you in any way relieved as Lesotho? What does the 90 days allow you to do to try and normalize relations with the United States?
The 90 days is designed for people like us to get audience with the U.S. government and negotiate the tariffs again. But the experience that I've had already the past few days, it's terribly difficult to get hold of anybody of substance in the U.S. administration at this stage on this particular issue. But I've just been informed that this morning that some official from USTR will be in the region, maybe Pretoria, or you can come to Lesotho next week. So probably I'll just have to try and take advantage of that one.
Say a bit more about the difficulty of getting a hold of, and I note that you use the words of anybody of substance in the administration in Washington. How difficult does that make it? Because all along we've been told, rather than reciprocation in terms of these tariffs, the United States would rather countries are in direct negotiations about how to normalize the trade relationships. Kind of make it difficult, doesn't it, when you can't get a hold of someone of substance in Washington?
Yes, we find ourselves having to rely on some lobby groups that are also aligned with the current Trump administration. they are very expensive to start with. The cheapest is $500,000 US. And the most expensive, the one that we thought was even more viable from what they were saying to us, is $1.5 million US. And they all want the money up front, and they do not guarantee results. So it's another line of business that's just come up.
Sure.
The whole thing, it's shocking.
Wow. So is it almost like a consultancy that says, you've got a problem, we've got access, we could facilitate, but it will cost you something?
We'll sell this access that we have. Purportedly, they have access. Let me just highlight that. It's not proven. We don't know. What worries me is that the contract that was given to us, or contracts, all of them had a clause that they do not want to guarantee that we will be successful or will get results. And they want the money up front, all of it.
Sure. That is quite shocking that a whole industry has spawned around this issue that is of such concern for many, many countries. You are one of the countries that have had that benefit that has come with the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, AGOA, in terms of facilitating trade into the United States. When you see all of these moves, what does that tell you about where AGOA stands, whether you can still continue to rely on AGOA for access, barrier-less access to the US market?
The answer is yes and no. Yes, we need the market. We need the market for liquidity, for foreign exchange. We need to have that. But the market, with or without AGOA, was beginning to prove difficult to access, because the buyers in the US were now moving towards buying closer to home. And where the turnaround times are shorter. Anything that you make in Lesotho, maybe here in the region, that goes through the port of Durban, will take 120 days. And the guys sometimes, they will prefer to have 3 weeks turnaround times.
Yeah.
So we can't compete with those that are closer to the US. And we have suffered some layoffs in the past because of this very same reason. We had more than 20,000 people working in the industry that was supplying the US market. Had it not been of this sourcing patterns, we'll still be talking about that big number. But now we're talking about 12,900.
Yeah.
So we saw earlier on that the market in its natural sense is beginning to be more difficult to access without any issues of tariffs and so on.
Yeah. All right, I've got to thank you for your time and sharing just your experience as a country. That's Lesotho's Minister of Trade, Industry and Business Development. That is Mokheti Shelile there. So you see there, I mean, the big takeaway from me, the industry that has spawned in the United States, that's selling access and facilitation of these conversations for countries that want to negotiate with the Trump administration. It's all very tricky. Stand by. We have more for you coming up in just a moment, including looking further into those Trump tariffs. Hey, welcome back. You're watching the Weekend Review on SABC News. Let's continue our focus on those tariffs, a raft of tariffs announced by the United States, and the subsequent pause have caused panic in markets as investors are gripped by uncertainty. Termed Liberation Day, the US President Donald Trump earlier this month announced what he called reciprocal tariffs, sending shockwaves through the global trading system and financial markets. He has paused the implementation of those so-called reciprocal tariffs for 90 days, except, of course, in the case of China, which retaliated against the US tariffs.
Import tariffs are taxes imposed by a government on goods from other countries. They are basically extra costs added to products from other countries when they enter the country. Amongst others, import tariffs are often used to raise revenue for government, protect local industries, and regulate trade. They can lead to an increase in prices for locals, limit competition, and may spark trade wars, as it's done in the case of the United States and China. Honorary Professor at Wits University, Yane Rousseau, says he's never seen anything like the developments of the past week.
This is unknown in economic policy and economic theory that a president of a large economy like the US, Mr. Trump, can announce a sharp tariff increase and then suspend it with no proper explanation. So what we've seen here is unprecedented. We've not seen it before, and it is really not conducive to international economic stability. And I have no idea what Mr. Trump's economic thinking was in acting in this way.
There are fears that Trump's move could weaken the global economy.
The fear was that in a blanket way in which these were being imposed, you would see a massive contraction in global economic activity because people would suddenly be faced with increases in product prices of 30 and 50% and would not be able to afford to buy those. And it would isolate the United States economy. What Trump did yesterday was to put such tariffs on hold. Such tariffs had been imposed on the basis of the extent to which those countries were exporting more to the United States than they were importing. In South Africa's case, 60%. And then Trump so-called magnanimously said he would offer a discount of 50% and therefore impose a tariff of only 30%. But before doing so, he first announced a blanket tariff on all imports of 10%.
Economists say the effects of the tariff war will be felt by consumers and businesses in their respective countries. They say the US citizens will pay more for goods imported from China and other countries, pushing up inflation.
If, for example, consumers imported those Chinese goods directly, they would now have to pay 125% more for them, which is a tremendously punitive rate. In other words, if they were able to import an iPhone for $3,000, they would now have to pay around $7,500 or $7,000 for that iPhone.
Tariffs imposed by any country, in the final analysis, results in higher prices for those goods in the country imposing the tariffs. Yes, some of the tariffs can be absorbed in the value chain from the producer to the distributor to the retailer, to the wholesaler to the retailer, let me say that. But inevitably, some of the tariff increase will flow through to the consumer in the form of higher prices, and that will push up inflation. So in the final analysis, the tariffs will be detrimental to US consumers.
The uncertainty in the markets has some believing a recession is possible in the United States.
In an environment where there's a lot of fears in the market, the US economy traditionally gets seen as a safe haven. So people will buy the dollar, people will buy US treasuries, in which case, of course, when you're buying US treasuries, demand for US treasuries is increasing. So the value of US treasuries would increase, but the yield has an inverse relationship to that. So yields would be coming down as we see more and more bidding for US treasuries. So us seeing a little bit of a slippage of US treasuries speaks to people actually selling off a little bit of those, as well as it did correlate quite strongly with the US dollar itself, because as people disinvest, they would disinvest out of US treasuries, which are denominated in bonds. And a lot of the assets from a safe haven perspective going a little bit more towards gold. So gold holding up quite well in this environment, trading in excess of 3,000. And that's really because, yes, the US economy is seen as a safe haven, but there's quite a lot of concerns around the fact that these trade tariffs could induce a recession within the US. And that's certainly the sentiment broadly, especially given, how aggressive the stance that the US was taking was.
As things stand, nearly all nations face a 10% import tariff, with 25% levied on some products from Canada and Mexico. The 25% import tariff on steel, aluminium, and foreign automobiles remains in place, while China faces a 145% import tariff duty, which was effected earlier in the week. At the close of the week, China retaliated by imposing a 125% import tariff on US goods. Gloria Sifakomusi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
So let me take you to a live event on the go now. The SACP Secretary General Solima Paila is at the podium, and that event is taking place in Mahikeng. It's commemorating the 32nd annual commemoration of the assassination of Chris Hani. Let's listen in.
All those that it has educated, or so-called educated. That's why we even have what in other countries are very scarce skills, even in this country. Like dingaka. Re na le dingaka tsa go fapana mo South Africa tse sa sebetseng. Re kopane le mokgatlo wa dingaka. SAMAT, union ya dingaka tsa mo South Africa. After ne ba entse march wa dingaka tse sa sebetseng kapa batho ba sebetsang tsa maphelo ba sa sebetseng, di nurse, di clinical technicians jwalo dingaka tse sena mosebetsi. Tabasarna school ajena. Yale recebeta le bon. We create processes in our communities to have access to people's health. At the same time, Muso encourage or we implement the national health insurance. Elore maburuana kapa makwana alinko DA. I hana ntwena obani bona. But for the medical aid. Una statistics say the medical aid in South Africa. Almost 72% ya the medical aid. And only 10% ya the medical aid. Because about 10% the medical aid. Kiba ba ibitang ma intellectual, kiba ba ruteileng, kiba ba leng the leaders in different areas. Ba ipona ba le kaono fita batho ba bang. Ba hana setjhaba sa rona se thola tsa maphelo across the board, universal health care. Re a ibatla universal health care ena, national health insurance, o re fihlelle o mang kapa mang. Ibe free at the point of service. National health care free at the point of service. How could you get a hospital? You can to any clinic, any healthcare center. Uska butware unalebuka hayo rotokomel. U attendiwe. After that, muso unge maikarabel asenu. That's why batala a single national fund under the Department of Health or government to make sure that we roll out the national health insurance for our people. In 20 negotiations, why should we subject ourselves to the interest of capital of the DA to force our movement to negotiate this question, the health of its own people? We should not accept that. There are certain things that, as a liberation movement, are red lines. The health of our people should be one of those red lines. And when we implement issues regarding the health of our people, we should not negotiate with any other one. But we're never a compromiser all the time. Because bungata babon abasoka bakula and baskabale access ya dipetlele tsa maemo a udimo. So this is a big issue e lo ra elwanela ona jwang. But rona re batla hore in taking forward this vision ya Chrisani ya bo social, re the basic needs le di rights tsa batho ba rona discuss sebediswa je ka di commodities ntho tse lo re di a rekuwa. A tro bona commodity ke ntho e lo re kana ko shopong wa ireka. Jwale maphelo a lona le ditukelo tsa lona di ska tshwana le ntho tse le re di a rekiwa mo shopong mo e leng re house na chelete a gone o ba le ditukelo tsa hao tse felletseng. So ke ka hore re ntho e tshwanang le matlo, healthcare, thuto, metsi, electricity, transport di tlamehile di garantiwe ke mmuso. These things should not be sold for profit, should be the rights of society. Kinto e etsahalang mafatsheng a ipitsang hore a hlabolohile. Ebile re re matla a economy a fuwe democracy. This cannot be right that under democracy, economic power remains in the hands of the minority. Economic power is not democratized. Why this section is an exclusive section? We want democratization of economic power in this country. And the central role of the state becomes critical in order to enforce democratization of the economy. Therefore, we must break up monopoly stating and advance people's ownership through other forms of ownership. People's ownership, for instance, cooperatives, the state, worker control, people's control. It is not just one way of the economy. So economy no, there are alternatives. We can build people's economy. That's what we are going. That will be one of my last points as I'm speaking here. The question of building people's economy on the ground. At the same time, we must promote collective well-being over greed, status, or personal enrichment. Uhlompiwa motho o nang le ditjhelete o senang ditjhelete ha hlomphiwe. And taking to re South Africa, because in this case in our country makgowa ko ona tshwereng ditjhelete mo South Africa o tjho hore le a ile hore lwana tokoloho o ntse o hlomphiwa makgowa o feta batho ba batsho ba ba na ditjhelete. Impa ile ba tsebahalang ba ile hore ke bona ba kgonne ho kena ba sebetsa le makgowa se bana le ditjhelete a ba hlahella ba hlomphiwe je ka bontate Motsepe a ka hlahella mona le nna ka ofela le tsa mohlompha hobane la tseba re motho ona o na le ditjhelete. Jwale re batla hlompho setjhabeng e be teng kaofela e ska kgetholla hore ke ya makgowa and ya batho ba batsho ba ska hlomphiwa bakeng sa hore a bana ditjhelete. Again, comrades, re tlamehile re fedise ntwe ya hore market o Christian it should not be, we should not live under the tyranny of the market. In other words, under the dictatorship of the market. Muso. Hey, I can tell my comrade rona kuraba ke na ko muso. Ntwe re ba rutileng yona bophelo ba bona kaofela e fella kae. Kuruntu ya hore ba tseba hore mmuso a o tlameha o sebeletse market. Market ke ntho e re buang ya hore ha o sena tjhelete ha o no ja. Ha o sena tjhelete because ntho o tlameleng o ije o tlamele o ye ko marketing o ile o reka. Jwale re batla hore mmuso wa rona o tseba hore batho ba ka iphelela ka ntle le market, ba ka iphelela ba iketsetse ntho tse le re di tla ba phedisa. Baskar ba tla phela hobane a market as long ba kgona o sebetsa. Ke ka o mmuso o tlamehile o nka maikarabelo a bao ba sa kgoneng ho sebetsa. And therefore, comrades, re tlamehile re protect struggle sa rona sa ho tswetsa pele education ya rona, thuto ya rona ya setjhaba, from preschool to university. Ne re leboha mopresidente last after ba launchitse program ya bana ba banyana ba bitsang kindergarten, preschool education. Ntwe ne bohlokwa haholo. It's our early childhood development ba bitsa jwang. Mopresidente o na re ntwe ne tlamehile be re qadile ka yona 1994 a re kena o bua nnete. Nkabe South Africa ile different ona jwang. But I sure re ska qala neng kapa neng. So thuto e bohlokwa haholo. Problem ya ma capital ba utswitse le thuto ya setjhaba ba eketsa ya bona. jalo lona a le sa kgona ho iketsetsa because le capital a le soka le rona o ruteile monna o ipona o le style o le stuck. There's no way in which our people would have lived all this period by iphelele ba iketsetse e le stuck. Ke ka o reng re tlamehile re implemented program ya rona haholo e tla etsa hore batho ba rona ba bane le access to the schooling system kaofela a bona ba rutwe from ba sa le banyane hape re etse sure ntho tse tshwanang le basic income support for batho ba sa sebetseng di ba teng. We introduce universal basic income grant e bontshang hore mang kapa mang o na le tokelo ya ho phela ka hlompho and against extreme inequality in our country. In other words, all people have the right to live in dignity. You can't say someone can live in dignity when they have no income, and yet for them to live, they must go to the market to buy bread. Any other thing, food stuff is for sale. So what about a crisis in South Africa? Crisis of governance and crisis of the economy. But crisis of governance, can create a crisis ya economy? Because muso, utaba ukenya mato, uwatwerim muruo when actually they should be doing that and controlling that space. Happy comrade, Ronamo Communist Party, the Krizani. Communist Party ya Krizani. Rekaro umkankaso, umulukoloko omuhulu, watukuluo, or bitsa National Democratic Revolution. Barna baruteile mona pilinga ofela, abadi boniti babuaka NDR ba. The NDR. Yala National Democratic Revolution, kinto is simple. Iraure, ufedisa tshwenyo ya batho ke magowa. Rautwana. That's the first task ya National Democratic Revolution. Ufedisa tshwenyo ya batho ke magowa. To end white racist oppression of the black majority. That's the first task ya National Democratic Revolution. Ya bubedi kufedisa tshwenyo ya bomme ke batho ba bontate le economy. To end gender oppression and patriarchy, the system of male oppression over women, which is engendered in capitalist economy. Ya boraro, interrelated, kufedisa tshwenyo ya si economy ke bo kapitale o setšhaba. To end exploitation of the people of the working class by capitalist class. Into the tse interrelated, tse kgolo tsa National Democratic Revolution. Ya bone, ko hana puso ya ka ntle ya maBritani, imperialism. Into the National Democratic Revolution. So lona ba ditaba. And ka lebo le remametse mkaka jeno re kadile lata apologies. Le tlamele le tseba re a re bua ka NDR re bua ka eng ke ntho e simple jwala a se ntho e sophisticated jwale a re bua nnete hlopheho ya batho ba batsho e fedile mo South Africa hlopheho ya bomme e fedile mo South Africa.
All right, so that's just a sample and a flavor of the talk that is being given by the SACP General Secretary, Solima Paila. That event is on the go in Mahikeng. Among what you've heard in the last few minutes while we were listening there was him talking to one of the issues that is at the heart of the differences among the DA and the ANC in the Government of National Unity, the NHI, and basically voicing the SACP's support and saying that this should not even be a point of negotiation negotiation at this point. Solema Paela saying that the governing party, the ANC, well, the party that leads the government, the coalition government, should have certain red lines, and one of those should be issues that touch on the health of society. He touched on issues around the structure of the economy, saying that there needs to be a democratization of the economy. And lastly, if I can highlight towards the end there, Solema Paela, who is talking there in commemoration of 32 years since the assassination of Chris Hani. He was now talking about the country facing a crisis, saying it's a crisis in the economy that is linked to a crisis of governance, and saying that the crisis of governance is leading to the crisis in the economy, in that those who lead in governance are refusing or are scared to intervene decisively in the economy, and the result is that you have the crisis in the economy. So that was Solema Paela there. All right, we'll be back with more for you in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. This is the Week in Review on SABC News. Hey, welcome back. Another sporting week has come and gone by that had many highlights on the field and off the field of play. South Africa's 3 representatives in continental football progressing to the semi-finals of their respective tournaments was a moment to celebrate. And then there was the South African under-17 side's performance at the recent under-17 Africa Cup of Nations and their qualification for the World Cup. Another reason to celebrate. But on the other hand, Royal AM were shown the exit door after its protracted problems off the field. So let's take you to senior sports reporter, my colleague Thando Mqoli, who did signpost and flag these developments a week ago on Sunday and said, look out for them. He's got a review for us, as well as to tell us why he's out there. Nice and sunny day for you in Kailami, Thando. You are enjoying life. I'm here in studio. Take us back to the highlights of the week. Lots of action in football, and I believe lots of action where you are.
Definitely, Tulas, it's been an action-packed week. For example, let's start with the 3 South African teams progressing to the semi-finals of the CAF competitions. That is a moment of pride for South Africa. I remember when Dr. Patrice Motsepe came in as CAF president. He made it very clear that I, as a South African, am going to lead Africa, but I cannot do things alone. I need other teams to come and join me on the top of the table of African football. And it's nice to see 3 South African teams at the top of African football, for example, in the last 4 of both the Confederations Cup and the Champions League. Special mention to Stellenbosch FC. First time outing in the African competitions, and they've got to the semi-finals, beating a great like Zamalek, and that was impressive for me. Under-17s, again, they were unfortunate to lose to tournament host Morocco, but again, the performances that you saw throughout the tournament, that has been encouraging. There's a future. You know, when we look at golden generations, and this is one of those that we can look at and say, listen, one day we will talk about an Emil Witbooi as one of the great midfield masters in this country. Going on to Royal AM, that is rather unfortunate for me, because I think Royal AM was one of those teams that on their day they could beat the top teams, whether it's the Sundowns or Chiefs or Pirates, whenever they came down to the Harry Gwala Stadium. But unfortunately, things have turned sour for them off the field, and who knows, we'll see what happens with the team that was once Royal AM and once Bloemfontein Celtic, what shape or form that team will take in the future. But there's still a lot more sport happening this weekend. There's rugby happening in the European Club Rugby Championship. There's also still motorsport. I'm out at Kailami, where we always talk about people watching Formula One at this great venue. But once in a while, actually quite often, there are races. As you can see behind me, there are races that happen every weekend, and people come out in big numbers to support such races. I've basically found an advantage point now at the moment where you can see a couple of cars in the background, even spectators in the background, but at the bottom of the hill, trust me, there are thousands of cars who have just come to enjoy the festival of motoring at the moment. And with me, just to talk about motoring, the state of motorsport in South Africa, I've got Lufefa Maekiso, who will be talking Formula One with me. Let's start with that first. Formula One, McLaren seems to be the quickest car by far on the grid. But still, I think I raised a point with you a while back that those 2 McLarens are equally matched in performance and in driver performance, and I'm worried about how those two are going to be taking points of each other. It seems to be the case again this weekend where Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are just literally trading times, and you never know who really is the top driver in the team.
Good afternoon, Tando, to you and your viewers, and thank you for having me once more out here at the home of motorsports in Kailami. Yes, McLaren, they do have a conundrum, as you've put it, but in all true honesty, when they take points away from each other, the other drivers are also losing points that are in contention for the fight. So in all true honesty, for me, I think they should let them race until at least around 14-15, where you can see that there's a clear contender for the championship if it's not between the two of them. And that's my view.
There's a couple of teams which have got troubles all around. Ferrari, for example, unstable. They're still finding their way, just like Lewis is learning the car. Red Bull have got one driver. The other Red Bull car is really, really struggling, no matter who's driving it. Those teams, how do they get closer to the McLarens and make sure that when the development race has changed, they have a chance at both championships?
Let's start with Red Bull. I think there really is a serious situationship there, because now Yuki Tsunoda, who was quick in the V-Carb in the first two races, is now behind both V-Carbs as per yesterday's sessions there in Bahrain, because right now it's actually FP3 in Bahrain. So we don't know. I mean, we've heard the rumors. I mean, Sergio was the first one to say last year that the car has a small operating window of performance, which is how Max Verstappen, their number one driver, likes it, but it seems not to suit the driving style of all the other drivers that are his teammates. So that's a problem. And with Ferrari, you know, we've seen a lot of problems at Ferrari. Small margins of error and little tedious things like that, and I think it's continued into this year. Apparently Lewis Hamilton has got a huge influence in the garage of what happens. We heard that Charles Leclerc saying that he's going to be going his own direction following the performance from the Chinese Grand Prix. So I think they're definitely trying to find their feet on where to go. Lewis saying that there's a part in his car that's been underperforming, but there was promising signs yesterday in FP1 and 2.
Now, bringing matters back home, yes, we all want Formula One to come back to Africa, but it's also encouraging to see this family atmosphere that is Kailami at the moment, where kids, both young and old, genders, male, female, color doesn't matter. There's a nice mix of everything here. It's nice to see the family festival, people coming out in big numbers just to support motorsport, people to sit and say, we love motorsport beyond just the pinnacle that is Formula One.
100%. Actually, when I came through the gate today, I was pleasantly surprised to see such a good turnout here at the Extreme Festival. It's good to see that local motorsports is gaining momentum again, because we do know that in the early 10s, before that, mid-2000s, this facility, Kailami, was actually a white elephant before LSM distributors bought it and revamped it to what it is now, the Grade 2 circuit. So as you say, there's a good crowd here, lots of diversity, and people are here having fun day. Some are braaiing, kids are playing, there's a fun area there. It's just vibes.
Thank you, Lufefa. Basically, Tulas, as we hand back to you, for those who can and whenever they can, they must come out and enjoy some motorsport, whether it's Kailami, Swartkorps, or different tracks around the country. And for those of you who are sitting at home this afternoon, there's plenty of rugby action. There's Formula One qualifying that's coming up from Bahrain. Tomorrow is a big one, the Nedbank Cup semi-finals. I am not going to make any predictions, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that. That's Thando Mxoli live for us out in at the Kailami Grand Prix race circuit there. That's it. That is the weekend review for you this week. We'll be back sharp at the top of 12 tomorrow afternoon with the week ahead here on SABC News. But don't go anywhere. More quality news and current affairs programming coming your way. Alicia Jali and the team at SA Today on standby to take you through the rest of the afternoon. Take care.